Welcome to Beyond Suffrage. My name is Holly Andrew and I'm the curator of the museums here at Union Station.
And I'm Sarah Langston, head of special collections at Weber State University.
We're here to talk about the civil rights movement and its ties to the 19th Amendment. To start off with, we're going to start with our definition of citizenship. We define citizenship as a relationship between an individual and its state in accordance with certain responsibilities and rights pertaining to equal access and protection.
So Holly, my question is, why are we still talking about rights then in the 1960s?
Well, even though the 14th Amendment gave citizenship to all, people were still discriminating, which is why in 1963, John F. Kennedy proposed the Civil Rights Act, but he was assassinated before he could get that into law. By 1964, though, that law passed, which prevented discrimination. So we took it a step further. In 1965, we passed the Voters' Right Act, which prevented discrimination based on your literacy, any poll taxes, or any other prerequisites such as grandfather clauses or anything else. Then in 1968, we passed the Housing Act, which prevented redlining.
So that's interesting that you bring up redlining, because one of the questions people have is, well, there was no segregation or discrimination here in Utah, and the fact of the matter is there was. Most people don't realize that 25th Street was segregated, that African Americans weren't allowed on the north side of the street. They also weren't allowed to live other than below Lincoln. This was not a state law or a city law, but was redlining. And redlining is where you segregate a minority population into a certain part of town and don't allow them to move other places. We have someone like Betty Gillespie. Betty was born and raised here, and she talked a lot about the discrimination she faced as a young African American woman. One time she tried to go swimming in Lauren Farr Park and was told she wasn't allowed to go swimming in the swimming pool because African Americans weren't allowed. And so she fought for that right and ended up not getting into Lauren Farr Park, but was able to go swimming at Weber State, believe it or not. So we also had the League of Women Voters that got involved in the civil rights issue locally. What they did is they went around and asked questions to real estate agents, to educators, to employers, and asked, do you hire minorities? What is it like for them to work here? Trying to get a sense of the racial discrimination that was happening here. Now, we might not have had the big marches and protests that the South had, but we do know that there was discrimination here. Unfortunately, not much else is known about what was happening here during the civil rights time.
I think Betty had a really great quote.
She did. So there was a letter to the editor of the Standard Examiner who was talking about if African Americans would just act more like whites, then everything would be fine. And she quoted saying, "Dear Mrs. E," who was the editor, we don't want to be white, we just want to be free. So Holly, when we talk about civil rights, we also have to talk about other minorities and the rights that they fought for. Another woman that was here in Ogden was Leonela Sanez, and Leonela was part of the Utah Migrant Council, who really advocated for fair and equality housing for Latinos. She was also on the Governor's Advisory Council for Spanish speakers. She became the head of the Women's Bureau for the Department of Labor, which meant that she really walked around and advocated for better economic opportunities for women of all kinds, but really advocated for Latino women. She was also part of Socio, and Socio was this interesting group that appeared that was the Spanish-speaking organization for community integrity and opportunity. And their goal was to get conversations between the Latino population and the white population locally and figure out ways that they can work together.
We also have to talk about May Perry. May Perry was a Northwestern Band of Shoshone tribal member. She was also the historian for the tribe. She was very instrumental in writing down important dates and events for future generations. She also served on the White House Council for Indian Tribal Affairs and fought for the story of the Bear River Massacre.
Yeah, May did do a lot for the Native American community locally here. Another woman that we need to talk about is Mildred Mia. Mildred was of Japanese American descent and happened to live in California during World War II. Because of that, she was brought to Utah and was interned in Topaz until the end of the war. She ended up going on and getting her teaching degree and taught at Weber for decades. And one of the things that she really advocated for her students was they needed to understand people of different ethnicities and different minorities, and really pushed for them to read works by these different groups in order to gain a better understanding.
The passage of the Civil Rights Act, just like the 19th Amendment, was not a triumphant culmination, but a milestone in our journey for equal rights for all. We invite you to honor and draw inspiration from the women in this exhibit and many more by going to beyondsuffrage.org.